Blackthorn Hollow wasn't always a dying place. For generations, its lush valleys had been a paradise of towering pines, crystal waters, and wildlife so abundant that the old-timers swore you could throw a rock in any direction and hit something worth eating. Families had thrived here for generations, living by the rhythms of the land, taking only what they needed and preserving the rest for their children's children. They thought it would last forever. They were wrong. Ironcrest Industrial arrived with promises that gleamed as brightly as the gold they sought. Jobs, prosperity, progress. Words that sounded sweet to some ears but rang hollow to those who truly understood the mountains. The company wasted no time. Heavy machinery tore into ancient hillsides, while suits with clipboards and cold smiles assured locals that everything was up to code and environmentally sound. The changes came slowly at first, then all at once. The clear waters of Blackthorn River, once teeming with trout and home to generations of spawning salmon, turned a sickly gray-green. The pines began to wither, their needles browning and dropping before their time. Wildlife grew scarce, then absent, leaving behind an eerie silence that settled over the valley like a shroud. Progress, the Ironcrest men called it, as they patrolled the roads with guns strapped to their hips, their eyes hard as the ore they dug from the poisoned earth. Ezekiel Crow saw it all from his cabin perched high on the valley's eastern ridge. At 73, the old trapper had survived wars, blizzards, and more cold winters than most men see in 2 lifetimes. His gnarled hands had forgotten more about these mountains than most would ever know. When the last family packed their belongings and fled the valley, Ezekiel remained, watching through a spyglass as Warwick Kane, Ironcrest's owner, stood atop a bulldozed ridge like a conqueror surveying his domain. "You think you've won, don't you?" Ezekiel muttered, his voice raspy from disuse. "You think this land has no guardians left." That night, by candlelight, Ezekiel Crow penned 3 letters. His arthritic fingers struggled with the pen, but the message was clear. The hollow is dying. Kane and his men poison the water. Animals gone. Families forced out. I'm too old to fight. But the land remembers you 3. It's time to come home. He sealed each letter with melted wax, marking them with the paw print of a wolf, a symbol that would mean something to their recipients, even if it meant nothing to anyone else. As dawn broke, he handed them to a young rider passing through, along with a pouch of gold dust that represented the last of his savings. "These need to get into the right hands," Ezekiel told the rider. "Tell them Blackthorn Hollow is calling its sons home." The rider nodded, tucking the letters into his saddlebag before disappearing down the trail, leaving Ezekiel alone on his porch, watching the morning sun illuminate the dying valley below. The air carried the acrid scent of chemicals and the distant rumble of machines tearing at the earth. "3 ghosts," Ezekiel whispered, a smile creasing his weathered face for the first time in months. "3 ghosts coming for you, Kane, and Lord help you when they arrive." If you've ever seen justice take its time, let us know in the comments. Now, let's see what happens when justice comes knocking. In the northern mountains, where peaks touched clouds and summers were but brief visitors, Gideon Hallow tracked a massive bull elk through virgin snow. His breath hung in white clouds as he crouched to examine fresh tracks. The elk had passed no more than 20 minutes earlier, moving west toward the tree line. Gideon, a shadow among shadows with his buckskin clothing and 6-foot frame, hardened by decades in the wilderness, moved like water over stone, silent, patient, inevitable. When the rider found him 3 days later, Gideon was skinning his kill, hands bloodied to the wrists. The letter changed everything. He read it twice, then burned it, watching the flame consume Ezekiel's words before setting his face toward Blackthorn Hollow. 500 miles south, Flint McGraw sat in a trading post, haggling over the price of beaver pelts with a merchant too green to recognize the danger across the table. Flint's face was a map of violence. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to the corner of his mouth, a permanent sneer carved by a Comanche blade years ago. His reputation preceded him. Mothers pulled children closer when he passed, and men found urgent business elsewhere. "These are prime winter pelts," Flint growled, "worth twice what you're offering." The mail coach arrived before the argument could escalate. Among the deliveries was Ezekiel's letter. Flint read it, paid for a bottle of whiskey, and rode out without a word, the untouched pelts forgotten on the counter behind him. Cyrus Holt received his summons at a remote trading post where he occasionally sold game and picked up supplies. Unlike his brothers of the mountain, Cyrus moved through civilization with ease. His soft-spoken manner and unremarkable appearance belied the fact that he'd killed more men than smallpox. Only his eyes, pale blue and unnervingly steady, hinted at the predator beneath the surface. The postmaster couldn't know the letter he handed over would set in motion the end of Ironcrest Industrial. Cyrus read it once, nodded to himself, and purchased extra ammunition before heading west. 2 weeks later, they converged at an abandoned hunting lodge overlooking Blackthorn Hollow. None spoke as they dismounted, acknowledging each other with the barest of nods, men who communicated more with silence than words. Inside, they found Ezekiel waiting, looking even older than his years. "They're killing the valley," the old man said simply, pouring each a measure of moonshine. "Cain's bought off the law, threatened or drove out anyone who stood against him. The water's poisoned now. Nothing grows clean anymore." "Why us?" Cyrus asked, his voice soft but carrying in the still air. Ezekiel's weathered face creased into a grim smile. "Because you three are the only men I know who are more stubborn than these mountains, and because you owe this land. It shaped you, hid you, fed you, when you had nothing." The three men exchanged glances, an unspoken agreement passing between them. "Cain's got 40 men, at least," Ezekiel added, "armed and mean." Flint drained his glass in one swallow. "Then he's short by about 30. Moonlight painted Blackthorn Hollow in silver and shadow as the three mountain men crept through what was once pristine forest. The land's transformation struck them like physical blows. Where mighty oaks had stood, only stumps remained. The once clear river now ran thick with chemical sludge that glowed faintly in the darkness. The air itself tasted wrong, metallic and bitter. "Sweet Jesus," Flint whispered, his scarred face twisting in disgust as they crouched at the valley's edge. Below them, Ironcrest's main operation sprawled like an open wound across the landscape. Massive generators hummed, powering floodlights that illuminated conveyor belts and towering drills. Men with rifles patrolled the perimeter, their faces hard in the harsh light. "They work around the clock," Gideon observed, his keen eyes taking in every detail. 3 shifts. Security changes every 8 hours. Cyrus said nothing, but his finger traced the trigger guard of his Sharps rifle, a gesture his companions recognized all too well. They moved closer to Blackthorn Town, once a thriving community of 300 souls, now reduced to a ghost of itself. Most houses stood empty, windows shattered or boarded up. The few that showed signs of life had the beaten-down look of prisoners. "Cain's men took over the saloon," Gideon noted, pointing to the only building with light and noise spilling from its windows. "Made it their headquarters." As they watched from the shadows, the saloon door burst open. 4 Ironcrest men dragged a struggling local into the street. James Bennett, who'd once been the town's blacksmith. His face was bloodied, his clothes torn. "You don't tell Ironcrest where to dig, Bennett," one goon snarled, delivering a kick to the man's ribs that echoed in the empty street. "Your land belongs to the company now." "My family's been here 100 years, Bennett gasped, struggling to rise. "That deed is legal." Another kick silenced him. Behind him, his wife and 2 young children watched from their porch, terror etched on their faces. Flint's hand went to his knife, but Gideon's grip on his arm was iron. "Not yet," he whispered. "We need to understand what we're facing." It took everything they had to watch as Bennett was beaten unconscious and dumped on his own doorstep. His wife rushing to drag him inside, while the Ironcrest men laughed and returned to their drinking. Before dawn, they'd circled the entire operation. They saw the holding ponds filled with toxic runoff, the clear-cut hillsides prone to mudslides, the makeshift barracks housing more hired guns than miners. At the center of it all stood a modern office building, jarring against the ruined landscape. Kane's headquarters. "They're not just mining," Cyrus said as they retreated to their temporary camp. "They're erasing this place." Gideon nodded, his expression grim as he sketched a rough map in the dirt. "Kane's got everything locked down tight. Guards, dogs, alarm systems. But every fortress has a weakness." "What's the plan?" Flint asked, sharpening his knife with practiced strokes. Gideon looked up, his eyes reflecting the first light of dawn. "We don't just kill Kane's men. We make them afraid. We make them believe these mountains are haunted by something worse than death." Cyrus allowed himself a rare smile. "We become the ghosts of Blackthorn Hollow." Dawn hadn't yet broken when the foreman's head exploded in a red mist. He was mid-sentence, barking orders at a crew of exhausted workers when Cyrus's bullet found him from 600 yards away. The sharp crack of the rifle echoed through the valley, sending birds scattering from distant trees. By the time the workers processed what had happened, Cyrus was already moving to his next position. Across the mining site, chaos erupted as the night shift discovered their equipment. Hydraulic lines severed, fuel tanks contaminated with sand, control panels smashed beyond repair. 3 bulldozers sat immobilized, their massive treads cut through with precision. Most disturbing was the message carved into a fallen pine beside the main generator: "Leave or be buried." "What the hell happened?" demanded the shift supervisor, his face pale as he surveyed the damage. "We had men patrolling all night." The security chief, a burly ex-soldier named Mercer, knelt beside the fallen foreman. "Whoever did this knows what they're doing. Professional hit, military precision." Word reached Warwick Kane by mid-morning. The Ironcrest owner was a tall, distinguished man of 50, more accustomed to boardrooms than frontier towns. But beneath his tailored suits and manicured nails lurked a ruthlessness that had built his fortune on the bones of communities like Blackthorn. "I want them found," Kane ordered, his voice deadly calm as he surveyed the damage. "Triple the security patrols. Shoot anything that moves in those woods." But the mountain men were already gone, melting back into the wilderness they knew better than any map. For 3 nights they struck without warning. A sniper shot here, a sabotaged bridge there. Supply trucks disappeared on the road to town. Their drivers found tied to trees miles away, blindfolded but unharmed. After the 4th attack, Kane's patience snapped. He summoned Victor Langley, a bounty hunter whose reputation for tracking fugitives was matched only by his brutal methods of capture. "I'm paying $5,000 for each of these terrorists, dead or alive," Kane told Langley at their meeting. "They're disrupting a $1 million operation." Langley, a lean man with a duster coat and dead eyes, studied the few clues they had: boot prints, spent cartridges, and witness descriptions. "3 men," he murmured, examining a .50 caliber shell casing. "One's a sharpshooter using a Sharp's rifle." He paused, recognition flickering across his face. "Cyrus Holt. We have history." "You know these men?" Kane asked sharply. Langley nodded slowly, his expression hardening. "If it's who I think, you've stirred up something best left sleeping. These aren't ordinary men. They're ghosts. Legends." "I don't pay for superstition," Kane snapped. "I pay for results." "Then I'll bring you their bodies," Langley promised, "and collect triple my usual fee." Victor Langley assembled his hunting party with care. 6 men, each chosen for specific skills. 2 Apache trackers renowned for following trails days old. A former cavalry scout who could read terrain like others, read books. 3 gunmen with cold eyes and notched revolvers. Together they departed at first light, following tracks that ordinary men would have missed entirely. "These 3 split up here," Langley explained, studying disturbed pine needles beside a creek. "Standard evasion tactic. 2 went north toward the ridge, 1 circled back south. His men exchanged uneasy glances. Already they sensed something different about this hunt. These weren't ordinary fugitives blundering through the wilderness. "We'll split up too," Langley decided. "Johnson, take the Apaches and go north. Reeves, you and Miller circle south. Sanchez, you're with me. We'll follow the creek east where these tracks converge." They separated, unaware that from a ridge high above, Gideon Hallow watched through a brass spyglass, noting each man's movement and weapons. "Langley's organized," he reported to his companions at their hidden camp. "They'll be on us by nightfall if we don't move." Flint grinned, the scar on his face twisting. "Or we could welcome them properly." Cyrus remained silent, methodically cleaning his rifle, but offered a single nod of agreement. The trap was set in motion. Johnson and the Apache trackers followed signs north for 8 miles, the trail growing fresher with each passing hour. Too fresh. The more experienced tracker stopped suddenly, crouching to examine broken twigs. "Something wrong," he said in halting English. "Trail too clear, like invitation." Before Johnson could respond, a massive deadfall trap sprung from overhead. Logs suspended by vines came crashing down. One tracker dove clear, but Johnson and the second Apache weren't fast enough. The logs didn't kill them, but crushed legs ensured they wouldn't continue the hunt. Miles south, Reeves and Miller tracked their quarry to a narrow canyon. The signs indicated their target had entered, but never exited. Guns drawn, they advanced cautiously into the stone corridor. "I don't like this," Miller whispered. "Too easy to get pinned down in here." As if summoned by his words, a single gunshot echoed from somewhere above. Miller clutched his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. 3 more shots followed in rapid succession. None hit, but they sent the men scrambling for cover that didn't exist. Cyrus Holt's voice drifted down from the canyon rim. "Drop your weapons and walk out alive! Or don't!" Meanwhile, Langley and Sanchez followed their trail to a small clearing where it vanished completely. Langley's instincts screamed danger seconds before Flint McGraw emerged from behind a massive pine, moving with surprising speed for his size. Sanchez managed one wild shot before Flint's hunting knife found his throat. Langley drew faster, putting a bullet in Flint's shoulder, but the mountain man barely flinched as he charged. The bounty hunter fired twice more before strong hands locked around his neck, and the world went black. When Langley regained consciousness, he was alone in the clearing. Sanchez's body was gone. His guns were missing, along with his boots. "Your men are alive," Gideon's voice called from the shadows. "Consider that mercy. Next time, we won't be so generous. This land isn't yours to take." Kane's fury erupted like a volcano when Langley limped back to camp, bootless and defeated. Mercy from the mountain men was a humiliation worse than death for the bounty hunter, whose reputation lay in tatters. "I want every man armed, every one!" Kane roared to his security chief. 20,000 to whoever brings me their heads!" Intelligence gathered from locals revealed the mountain men were using an abandoned hunting lodge as their base. Under cover of darkness, Kane assembled 30 armed men, miners, security personnel, and desperate fortune seekers drawn by the bounty. They moved silently through the forest, surrounding the dilapidated 2-story structure that stood beside a frozen pond. "Remember," Mercer instructed the assault team, "there's only 3 of them. We've got them outnumbered 10 to 1. From his vantage point in the trees, Cyrus watched the men encircle the lodge through his rifle scope. The air was cold enough to make his breath visible, but his hands remained perfectly steady as he sighted his first target. Inside the lodge, Flint had strategically placed oil lamps to cast moving shadows against the windows, creating the illusion of men moving inside, while Gideon waited in the rafters. When the first shot rang out, it didn't come from Kane's men, but from Cyrus. A hired gun dropped silently, followed by another. Confusion spread through the attackers. The shots were coming from behind them, not from the lodge. "We're being flanked!" someone shouted. And panic erupted as men began firing wildly into the darkness. Seizing the moment, Flint triggered the explosives he'd planted along the approach paths. The blasts weren't designed to kill, but to disorient, sending men scattering in terror as dirt and splinters rained down. The attack collapsed into chaos. Some men fled immediately, others pressed forward toward the lodge, determined to claim the bounty. Those who reached the door found Flint waiting, an axe in his meaty hands and a grin on his scarred face that promised violence. "Evening, boys," he growled before unleashing hell. The close-quarters combat was swift and brutal. Flint's axe cleaved through gun arms and shoulders, his movements economical and deadly. From above, Gideon picked off targets with his pistols, while Cyrus continued his deadly work from the tree line, methodically eliminating anyone trying to flank the building. When silence finally fell, 9 of Kane's men lay dead, another dozen wounded, and the rest had scattered into the forest. Gideon dropped from the rafters, searching the bodies until he found what he sought, a sealed envelope on one of the dead men. He broke the wax seal and read it with a lamplight. "Kane's written to the governor," he announced grimly, "claiming we're anarchists destroying legitimate business, asking for state militia." Flint spat on the floor. "How long before they arrive?" "A week, maybe less," Gideon replied. "Time's running short." Cyrus appeared in the doorway, rifle cradled in his arms. "Then we finish this now. We take the fight to Kane." Midnight cloaked Blackthorn Valley in darkness as the 3 mountain men slipped past Ironcrest's perimeter guards, moving like wraiths through security blind spots Gideon had mapped during their surveillance. The main processing facility stood before them, a towering monstrosity of metal and wood, humming with machinery that never slept. "Kane's pride and joy," Gideon whispered as they paused in the shadows, "where they separate ore and dump the waste." Their objective lay beyond, a makeshift dam creating a massive holding pond filled with chemical runoff from the mining operation. Even in darkness, the toxic sludge emitted a sickly greenish glow, the surface occasionally bubbling as gases escaped from the depths. "My God," Cyrus breathed, seeing the full scale of the contamination for the first time. "This is what's poisoning the river." Flint's face hardened. "All downstream for 20 miles. No wonder nothing lives." They moved silently past dozing guards and into the facility's heart where workers operated crushing machinery and separation tables. The men stuck to the shadows, careful to remain unseen as they assessed the operation's vulnerabilities. In a secluded corner, they discovered what they sought. Massive wooden barrels stacked floor to ceiling, each branded with skull warnings and chemical formulas. "Mercury compounds," Gideon noted grimly. "They use it to separate gold from ore, then dump what's left." "Enough poison here to kill the valley 10 times over," Cyrus added, examining the storage area. Flint, ever practical, was already calculating. "If we blow the dam, it all washes downstream, kills everything it touches." Gideon shook his head. "We need to redirect it, send it back where it came from." Understanding dawned on their faces simultaneously. The mining tunnels that honeycomb the valley, Kane's precious operation, could become its tomb. Working with silent efficiency, they set their plan in motion. Flint planted explosives at strategic points in the dam, while Cyrus created a diversion at the far end of the compound, setting fire to an empty storage shed. As guards rushed to contain the blaze, Gideon rigged a crude wooden channel that would divert the toxic flow toward the main mine entrance once the dam broke. 5 minutes, Flint whispered, indicating his explosives were primed. They melted into the forest as chaos erupted behind them. The explosion, when it came, was surprisingly subdued, a muffled thump followed by the ominous cracking of timber. The dam didn't collapse catastrophically but failed gradually, the poisoned water finding the new path of least resistance. From their vantage point on a nearby ridge, they watched as thousands of gallons of toxic waste poured into Kane's mine shafts. Alarm bells rang throughout the compound. Workers fled the tunnels, some covered in chemical burns, others coughing violently. "Those tunnels go down hundreds of feet," Gideon observed. "They'll never pump it all out." Cyrus nodded, his expression somber. "Poetic justice. The poison he spread returns to him. In the distance, a rider galloped toward Blackthorn town, doubtless carrying news of the disaster to Kane. His response would be swift and merciless. They were counting on it. News of the mine flooding spread through Blackthorn Valley like wildfire. By sunrise, every resident knew that Kane's operation had suffered a devastating blow. The poisoned water had rendered the main shaft inaccessible, and engineers estimated it would take months to pump out the contamination, if it could be done at all. In Blackthorn Town, a subtle change rippled through the community. Shopkeepers who once averted their eyes when Ironcrest men entered now stared with barely concealed defiance. Whispers of the Mountain Men passed from lip to lip like a prayer, a legend taking shape in real time. James Bennett, still bruised from his beating, was the first to act. When Ironcrest guards demanded supplies from his rebuilt smithy, he refused outright. "My forge is closed to Ironcrest," he declared, standing tall despite his injuries. "Find another smith." The guards reached for their weapons but froze when neighbors emerged from nearby buildings, hunting rifles in hand. For the first time, the balance of power shifted, however slightly. Similar acts of resistance flared across the valley. Rail lines delivering equipment to Ironcrest mysteriously derailed. Supply wagons found their wheels sabotaged. Locals who had once cowered now formed informal patrols, protecting each other's properties from Ironcrest retaliation. "It's not just the three of them anymore," Mercer reported to Kane, who sat brooding in his office as engineers delivered increasingly dire assessments of the mine damage. "The whole damn valley's turning against us." Kane's handsome face had grown gaunt with stress and rage. The mining operation represented millions in investment, and his backers in Chicago were demanding explanations. His political connections were distancing themselves as rumors of environmental devastation spread. "I want those 3 men dead," Kane hissed, slamming his fist on the polished mahogany desk. "Everything was under control until they arrived. They're the symbol, the inspiration. Cut off the head and the body dies." Victor Langley, his pride still smarting from his earlier defeat, stepped forward. "I have a plan. They won't expect us to know about the old church." Kane raised an eyebrow. "What church?" "Abandoned stone chapel on the eastern ridge. According to that old trapper we interrogated, it's sacred ground to them. The 3 of them hunted together as boys, made some kind of blood oath there." "Ezekiel talked?" Kane asked, surprised the old man had broken. Langley's expression darkened. "Eventually." "So we set a trap," Kane mused, understanding forming. "We make it obvious," Langley explained. "Let word leak that we're moving what's left of our operation there. They're arrogant now, confident. They'll come directly at us." "And we'll be waiting," Kane finished, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Langley nodded. "I want 30 men, the best you've got. And this time, we do it my way. No survivors." As they laid their plans, neither man realized that 10 miles away, Gideon was already watching through his spyglass, reading their intentions as clearly as footprints in fresh snow. "They're planning something at the old church," he told his companions. "A trap." Flint cleaned his axe with methodical strokes. "Then we'll oblige them." "On our terms," Cyrus added softly. The old stone church stood on Blackthorn's eastern ridge, its weathered walls and collapsed roof a testament to time's relentless march. Built by early settlers, abandoned during a long-ago winter, it had become a silent sentinel watching over the valley. Now, it would witness one final judgment. Moonlight filtered through the broken stained glass as Kane's men took their positions. Langley had arranged them with tactical precision, snipers in the bell tower, riflemen behind the crumbling stone altar, shotgun-wielding bruisers concealed among the rotting pews. Outside, more men hid among the gravestones in the overgrown cemetery. "Remember," Langley instructed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Wait for my signal. We want all 3 inside before we spring the trap." Kane himself waited in a reinforced wagon 50 yards distant, unwilling to risk his own skin but eager to witness his enemy's demise. The first hour passed in tense silence, then the second. By the third, men shifted uncomfortably, cold seeping into their bones from the stone floor. A nervous gunman whispered, "Maybe they're not coming." Langley silenced him with a glare. "They'll come." As if summoned by his confidence, a figure appeared in the church's arched doorway, massive, silhouetted against the moonlight. Flint McGraw, his axe gleaming dully at his side. "Evening, boys," his gravelly voice echoed through the sacred space. "Hope I'm not interrupting prayer time." Before anyone could react, Flint charged forward with surprising speed, hurling something that clattered across the stone floor. A bundle of dynamite, its fuse sparking. "Fire!" Langley screamed. But it was too late. The explosion rocked the ancient building, collapsing part of the remaining roof and filling the church with choking dust and debris. In the chaos, Flint became a whirlwind of violence, his axe rising and falling with mechanical precision as he cut through the men nearest the door. From the bell tower, a sniper took aim at Flint's broad back, only to feel the cold kiss of steel against his throat. "Don't," Gideon whispered, before subduing him with a precise blow. Outside, rifles cracked as Cyrus eliminated the cemetery guards one by one, his shots so perfectly placed that many died without realizing they'd been targeted. Inside, Langley recovered from the initial shock, rallying his remaining men. "Form up! Don't let him reach the altar!" Gunfire erupted in the confined space, bullets ricocheting off ancient stone. Flint ducked behind a fallen beam, bleeding from 2 wounds but grinning like a wolf. From the rafters, Gideon rained down precise shots, each bullet finding its mark in the swirling dust. The battle became a brutal, close-quarters nightmare. Men screamed as Flint's axe found flesh. Others fell to Gideon's knife or Cyrus's distant rifle. Langley, realizing the tide had turned, made a desperate break for the side exit. He emerged into the cemetery, running blindly between tombstones, only to find Cyrus waiting, rifle raised. "You always were the best shot," Langley conceded, reaching slowly for his revolver. The sharp crack of Cyrus's rifle echoed across the ridge. Langley fell backward, a perfect red hole centered between his eyes. Warwick Kane knew the battle was lost when the shooting stopped. The eerie silence that descended over the old church carried more menace than the gunfire that had preceded it. From his vantage point in the reinforced wagon, he watched as smoke drifted from the shattered windows, illuminated by the pale moonlight. Not one of his men emerged. Cold fear settled in his gut as he ordered his driver, "Get us back to town, now!" The horses had barely begun to move when a single shot rang out. The driver slumped forward, a neat hole through his temple. The wagon jerked to a halt as the horses, spooked by the sudden movement, reared and neighed in terror. Kane reached for his pistol but froze when a shadow materialized beside the wagon door. "Evening, Mr. Kane," Gideon said quietly, opening the door with exaggerated politeness. "I believe it's time for our business negotiation." Kane found himself dragged from the wagon, his tailored suit tearing as Gideon's iron grip pulled him toward the church. Inside, the scene was apocalyptic. Bodies lay strewn across the stone floor, blood pooling in ancient grooves worn by generations of worshippers. Flint and Cyrus waited near the altar, both bloodied but standing. Flint's axe dripped crimson onto the floor, while Cyrus methodically reloaded his rifle, his movements precise despite the carnage surrounding them. "Quite the operation you've built," Gideon observed conversationally, forcing Kane to his knees before his companions. "Impressive what money can buy. Guards, political influence, the right to poison an entire valley." "You don't understand," Kane stammered, his composure finally cracking. "This is progress, development. You can't stop the future." Flint laughed, the sound echoing horribly in the ruined church. "Looks like we just did." Kane's eyes darted between the 3 men, desperation mounting. "Listen to me. I can make you rich. I have money, connections. Name your price." "Our price?" Gideon repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "Our price is justice." "For what?" Kane shouted, hysteria creeping into his voice. "For progress? For bringing civilization to this backwater? Cyrus stepped forward, speaking for the first time. For the river that won't run clean for a generation. For the animals that died choking on your chemicals. For the families who lost everything. For Ezekiel, Flint added grimly. Kane's eyes widened at the name. The old man? He was nothing, a relic. He was the last guardian of this valley, Gideon said, until he called us home. The mountain men exchanged a glance, some unspoken agreement passing between them. To Kane's surprise, Gideon pulled out a hunting knife and placed it on the ground just beyond his reach. You poisoned the land, Gideon growled, as they bound Kane securely to an ancient oak that grew through the church's collapsed section. And now it spits you back out. The three men departed without another word, leaving Kane alone in the darkness. As they walked away, the distant howling of wolves drifted through the night air. Kane pulled desperately at his bonds, eyes fixed on the knife tantalizingly out of reach. In the shadows beyond, pairs of yellow eyes began to appear, watching with ancient, merciless hunger. Spring came to Blackthorn Hollow with tentative green shoots pushing through soil that had known only poison for too long. The winter had been harsh, but with each passing week, signs of renewal emerged across the scarred landscape. Warwick Kane had vanished into legend. The official story claimed he'd fled after Ironcrest's collapse, but locals exchanged knowing glances when his name arose. James Bennett stood on his porch, watching children play near the river for the first time in years. The water still carried a faint chemical tinge, but fish had returned to the shallows, small, cautious, but alive. Nature was reclaiming what had been stolen. It'll be a decade before the valley fully recovers, Ezekiel Crow observed, joining Bennett on the porch. The old trapper had aged visibly during the winter, but his eyes remained bright with stubborn life. But she's fighting back. Land has a way of healing itself if given the chance. Throughout the valley, transformation continued. Ironcrest's abandoned equipment rusted in the elements, slowly being consumed by creeping vines and determined underbrush. The main facility had been dismantled by the townspeople, its usable materials repurposed for rebuilding homes and businesses that had fallen into disrepair. With Kane gone and the operation shuttered, families began returning to Blackthorn Hollow. Each week brought new faces, or rather, old faces coming home. The town blacksmith's forge burned bright again. The general store reopened its doors. Children's laughter echoed where once there had been only the grinding of mining machinery. They're calling it a miracle in the papers, Bennett remarked, handing Ezekiel a cup of coffee. How an environmental disaster was averted by local action. Ezekiel snorted. Politicians, always finding pretty words for ugly truths. A rider approached from the east, bringing mail and newspapers from larger settlements. Among the letters was one addressed to Ezekiel, unmarked except for a small wolf's paw print pressed into the wax seal. The old man smiled but didn't open it in company. Later, alone in his cabin, he read the brief message, "The mountains endure, so do their guardians." No signature was needed. Ezekiel knew the three mountain men had returned to their solitary lives, ghosts once more. But they had left something permanent behind, a reminder that some things could not be bought, some bonds could not be broken, and some places would always find defenders when they called. As twilight fell across the healing valley, Ezekiel stepped onto his porch and raised a glass to the darkening mountains. "Until next time, boys," he whispered. "Until next time." Stories spread like wildfire across the frontier. Tales of three ghosts who appeared from the wilderness to bring justice when the law had failed. Some dismissed them as campfire tales, but those who had witnessed their work knew better. In mining camps and corporate boardrooms alike, men spoke in hushed tones of Blackthorn Hollow and the fate of Warwick Kane. 6 months after Ironcrest's collapse, surveyors from a timber company arrived at the valley's edge. They found their path blocked by a crude wooden sign, "The Mountains Remember." After studying the rejuvenating forest and conferring briefly, They marked the valley as unsuitable for development on their maps and moved on without felling a single tree. Similar scenes played out across the frontier. Companies that once bulldozed their way through pristine wilderness now hesitated, weighing the cost of progress against the whispered legends of mountain justice. It wasn't fear of the law that gave them pause, but something more primal, the sense that the land itself had defenders who answered to older, deeper codes. Meanwhile, the three mountain men returned to their separate lives, each carrying the weight of Blackthorn Hollow in different ways. Gideon Hollow vanished into the Northern Territories, tracking game and living on his own terms. Occasionally, he would emerge from the wilderness to guide lost travelers or warn settlements of approaching dangers before disappearing again. Flint McGraw drifted between frontier towns, his scarred face ensuring he was left alone. Yet those in trouble sometimes found unexpected help from the intimidating stranger who appeared when needed most, then moved on without seeking thanks. Cyrus Holt settled in a remote cabin, speaking little but always watching. Hunters sometimes spotted him on distant ridges, his rifle a constant companion, his gaze forever scanning the horizon for threats to the wilderness he called home. On rare occasions, usually during the darkest winter nights, three riders would converge at an abandoned hunting lodge. No words were necessary between them. Their bond had been forged in blood and sacrifice. They would share a bottle of whiskey in silence, each knowing that if the call came again, they would answer without hesitation. In Blackthorn Hollow, life continued its slow return to normalcy. The scars of Ironcrest's destruction gradually faded beneath new growth. Children who once fled now played in forests that grew greener each season. And on quiet nights, locals swore they could hear the mountains themselves breathing easier, secure in the knowledge that some guardians never truly leave their post. For as long as there were mountains, there would be mountain men. And as long as there were mountain men, some things would remain sacred and protected, beyond the reach of even the most powerful men and their gold. If you thought these were crazy, you won't want to miss what happens in this next video.